Vain bikers laugh at a lone traveler, the secret he reveals leaves them in fear. The city alley was eerily quiet. A few flickering streetlights cast weak, shaky beams over the graffiti-covered walls. Garbage cans lined the curb, and an occasional gust of wind sent old newspapers fluttering through the air. A man sat against the cold brick wall, legs stretched out in front of him, arms crossed lazily. He wasn't homeless, at least, he didn't look like it, but he wasn't dressed like he belonged in this part of town either. His weathered boots, faded jeans, and military-style jacket made him look like a traveler. Someone just passing through. And that's exactly why he caught the attention of the wrong people. From the other end of the alley, the low growl of motorcycle engines echoed through the night. Then, laughter. The kind of laughter that made people lock their doors. A group of men on sleek black motorcycles rolled to a stop a few feet away. 5 of them. Leather jackets, steel-toe boots, cocky grins stretched across their faces. One of them, a man with a scar across his cheek, swung his leg over his bike and sauntered toward the seated traveler. The others followed, forming a half-circle around him. The traveler didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't acknowledge them. The leader of the group clicked his tongue and chuckled. Well, what do we have here? Another biker, a younger guy with slicked back hair, smirked. Looks like we got ourselves a lost little lamb. The others laughed. Still, the traveler didn't react. He simply sat there, looking straight ahead, as if they weren't there. The leader squatted down in front of him, tilting his head to the side. Not much of a talker, huh? The traveler's eyes flickered to him, just for a second, before looking away again. That one small movement made the leader frown. Something about this guy was off. The other bikers, oblivious, kept laughing. One of them, a burly man with tattooed arms, nudged his boot against the traveler's leg. Hey, buddy, you deaf? The traveler slowly exhaled. The leader grinned, thinking the man was intimidated. He patted the traveler's jacket, acting as if he were checking for valuables. Relax, friend, we're just curious. You look like someone with an interesting story. He turned back to his crew, laughing. Don't he look like one of them wandering ex-soldiers you see in the movies? The others howled with laughter. But the traveler? He didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't even seem annoyed. And for the first time, the gang noticed. The leader's grin faltered, just for a second. That silence. That unnerving stillness. It wasn't fear. It wasn't nervousness. It was something else. And that's when unease started to creep in. The younger biker with the slicked back hair scoffed, trying to shake off the tension. You're no fun, old man. The traveler slowly turned his head just slightly toward him. Old man. His voice was calm. Too calm. The biker hesitated. Something about the way he spoke didn't sit right. The leader forced a grin, trying to regain control of the situation. Don't take it personal, man. We're just having some fun. He leaned in closer. You don't mind a little fun, do you? For the first time, the traveler shifted his posture. Not aggressively. Just enough to make the leader pause. And in that moment, as the gang surrounded him, something changed in the air. It was subtle. A shift. Something none of them could quite explain. The hairs on the leader's arms stood on end. And deep down, he knew. They had just made a terrible mistake. The leader of the gang, a man who thrived on intimidation, didn't like the way the traveler looked at him. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was something worse, complete indifference. And that unsettled him. Still, he wouldn't let a nobody sitting on the street make him look weak in front of his crew. You got a death wish, pal? The leader sneered, his voice dripping with amusement, though his eyes flickered with something else. The traveler blinked slowly and exhaled through his nose. No. The leader scoffed, flashing a grin to his men. You hear that, boys? Our friend here ain't got a death wish. The others chuckled, but it wasn't the same cocky laughter as before. Something about the traveler's stillness was starting to get under their skin. One of them, the tattooed biker with a shaved head, took a step forward, looking to reassert dominance. "Then maybe you should start talking. 'Cause sitting here all quiet like, it ain't doing you any favors." The traveler didn't respond. Didn't even look at him. Just sat there, arms resting over his knees, like he was simply waiting for something. The shaved-head biker clicked his tongue in frustration. "Maybe he's slow," he said with a smirk. The younger biker, the one with slicked-back hair, grinned. "Or maybe he thinks he's better than us." The leader narrowed his eyes. That last thought lingered. Maybe the guy thought he was better than them. Maybe that's why he wasn't reacting. Maybe he thought he wasn't in danger. "Hey, pal," the leader said, placing his boot against the traveler's knee and shoving it slightly. The traveler didn't budge. "You think you're too good to talk to us?" Slowly, finally, the traveler turned his head, not in anger, not in annoyance, just in acknowledgement. And then, in the same calm tone, he asked, "You really want to do this?" The words weren't threatening. They weren't loud. But something about the way he said them made the entire group hesitate. The leader's smirk twitched. His ego flared. He crouched down, now face to face with the traveler. "And what exactly do you think you're gonna do about it?" The traveler didn't blink. Didn't lean away. Didn't change his expression. He just looked at him. Not like an enemy. Not like a threat. Like a man who had already decided the outcome. The gang felt it now. That shift in the air. Something wasn't right. But their leader, too stubborn to back down, wasn't listening to instinct. "I asked you a question." He reached forward, grabbing the traveler's jacket, trying to lift him slightly, but the moment his fingers closed around the fabric, something changed. The traveler moved. It wasn't fast. It wasn't aggressive. But it was precise. A single, subtle shift, a hand gripping a wrist, a movement barely visible. And suddenly, the leader was the one on his knees. His wrist was twisted, not broken, but held in a way that sent a sharp jolt of pain through his arm. A small gasp escaped his lips. The other bikers froze. Not a single one of them saw what had just happened. But they saw the result. Their leader, the man no one dared to challenge, was on the ground, wincing. The traveler leaned forward slightly, his grip firm but calm. His voice didn't rise. He didn't yell. He simply said, "I asked you a question too." The leader gritted his teeth. He wanted to fight. Wanted to lash out. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he could win. And neither were his men. They stood there, eyes wide, waiting for what would happen next. Waiting for their leader to make a decision. Waiting to see if they had just picked a fight with the wrong man. And deep down, they already knew the answer. The leader gritted his teeth, his wrist still caught in the traveler's grip. The pain wasn't unbearable, but the message was clear. This man wasn't just some wanderer. The others watched in stunned silence. Their leader, the man they feared, the man who had never been bested, was on his knees. All from a single movement. That shouldn't have been possible. The leader clenched his jaw, forcing out a smirk. All right. You got some tricks." The traveler remained silent, his grip firm. The smirk twitched on the leader's face. "But that don't mean a damn thing." He jerked his arm back, freeing himself from the traveler's hold. Stumbling up to his feet, he shook his wrist, trying to mask the fact that his fingers still tingled from the pressure. The gang watched him, waiting. If he lost face now, they'd never respect him again. So, he did what he always did. He tried to act like he was still in control. "You think you're tough, huh?" The traveler finally stood. And that simple act made every single biker tense up. Not because he was big. Not because he was flexing muscle. But because there was something about the way he moved. Effortless. Controlled. Dangerous. I don't think anything, the traveler replied, his voice calm. I just know. The leader narrowed his eyes. Know what? The traveler tilted his head, examining him. Then, finally, he said. That you don't want to do this. Silence. For the first time, the gang didn't laugh. No cocky remarks. No smart comebacks. Because deep down, they knew it too. But the leader? His pride wouldn't let him back down. He turned to his men, flashing them a grin, trying to hide the doubt creeping into his own mind. This guy thinks he's some kind of legend, huh? He stepped closer to the traveler, getting in his face. What are you, ex-military? Some old-school fighter? You think we should be scared of you? The traveler sighed softly. Not out of fear. Not out of frustration. Out of boredom. You keep asking the wrong questions. The leader flinched. For the first time, he felt it. That uncomfortable, creeping realization. That feeling in the pit of his stomach telling him to stop. To walk away. To let this go. But it was too late for that now. His men were watching. And so, in a desperate attempt to save face, he threw the first punch. A wide, heavy swing, the kind that had knocked out plenty of men before. The kind that had always made him feel like he was in control. But this time, it missed. Not because the traveler stepped back. Not because he dodged. But because, he wasn't even there anymore. A blur of movement. A shift of weight. And suddenly, the leader was stumbling forward, his own momentum working against him. He barely caught himself before falling to the ground. And when he turned around, the traveler was standing exactly where he had been, as if he had never moved at all. The gang was silent. The leader's breathing was heavy. His fists clenched. This wasn't possible. Nobody moved like that. Nobody could read an attack before it happened. And yet, this man had just made him look like a fool. The traveler exhaled. Then, finally, he looked at the rest of the gang. I'll give you one last chance. His voice was calm, controlled, final. Walk away. The gang hesitated. Some of them were already stepping back. But the leader? His pride wouldn't let him. His pride would be his downfall. The leader's face twitched with frustration as he glared at the traveler. He had never been in this position before, being made a fool of in front of his own gang. His men were watching, waiting to see what he would do next. Backing down meant losing control. But something deep inside him, something primal, was screaming at him to stop. And yet, his ego wouldn't allow it. He took a step forward, trying to regain the upper hand. You think you're some kind of badass, huh? The traveler tilted his head slightly, as if studying him. Then, without emotion, he simply said, No. I just know what happens next. The leader's fists clenched. Yeah. And what's that? The traveler's eyes were calm, unreadable. You lose. Silence. A chill ran through the gang. The way he said it, not as a threat, but as a fact, made the moment even more unnerving. The leader let out a low chuckle, trying to shake off the unease. You're full of it. But even as he said it, he wasn't sure if he believed his own words anymore. One of the younger bikers, the one with slicked back hair, swallowed hard. B-boss, maybe we should just go. The leader shot him a sharp look. Shut up. He wasn't backing down. Not now. Not when he still had something to prove. So he did what he always did when backed into a corner. He threw a punch. It was fast. Strong. And completely useless. Before anyone could even see what had happened, the leader was on the ground. His face pressed into the pavement, his arm twisted behind his back. The gang froze. Nobody had even seen how he got there. 1 second he was standing. The next, he was pinned. The traveler hadn't even broken a sweat. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even trying. He was simply in control. The leader struggled, grunting in frustration. But the traveler barely applied any pressure. "I warned you." His voice was calm, almost tired. The gang took a step back. This wasn't a fight. This was a lesson. And their leader was on the losing end of it. The traveler leaned in slightly, his voice low enough for only the leader to hear. "You picked the wrong man." The leader's breathing was ragged. He wanted to fight back. Wanted to prove he was still in charge. But for the first time in his life, he felt powerless. The traveler let go, stepping back. The leader staggered to his feet, clutching his arm. For the first time ever, he didn't know what to do. The gang looked at him. Not for orders. But because they realized something he hadn't yet. The power had shifted. The traveler wasn't just some drifter. He wasn't weak. And he definitely wasn't afraid. One of the bikers whispered to another. "Who the hell is this guy?" The leader's hands trembled. Not from pain. But from the horrible realization creeping into his mind. This wasn't just some random man. They had just provoked someone they should have left alone. And now, they were all at his mercy. The alley was dead silent. For the first time, the gang wasn't laughing. The arrogance that had dripped from their words just minutes ago had evaporated. They all saw it now. They had messed with the wrong man. The leader clenched his jaw, his pride refusing to let him admit the truth. But the pain in his wrist and the cold sweat on his back told him everything he needed to know. This guy wasn't normal. "Who the hell are you?" the leader growled, still breathing hard. The traveler slowly rolled back the sleeve of his jacket. And then, they saw it. A marking. A tattoo. A military insignia. One of the bikers, the youngest of the group, stumbled back, his face draining of color. "No, no way." The leader snapped his head toward him. "What? What is it?" The young biker's voice shook. "That mark, it's Special Forces." The rest of the gang froze. The traveler calmly rolled his sleeve back down, as if nothing had happened. The leader's heart pounded in his chest. His mind raced, trying to process what this meant. Special Forces. Not just military. Not just a soldier. This man had been trained for war. For things that none of them could even imagine. The traveler's calmness wasn't arrogance. It was experience. He had seen real danger. And that meant, they weren't even a threat to him. The gang exchanged nervous glances. A few of them shifted uneasily, no longer wanting to be part of this. Ricky, the slick-haired biker who had been the loudest earlier, was now dead silent. He took a slow step back, whispering under his breath. Oh man, we need to go." The leader felt his stomach turn. He had spent his whole life being the biggest, the baddest, the strongest. But now, he was standing in front of someone who was on a completely different level. A man who could take them all down without breaking a sweat. The leader forced himself to speak. "So what? You were a soldier. That's in the past, right?" The traveler stared at him. A long, heavy pause. Then, "You don't walk away from what I was." The words hit harder than any punch. The leader's confidence crumbled. His hands curled into fists, not out of anger, but out of frustration. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the one in control. And he hated it. The traveler took a slow step forward. Just one step. But that was enough. The bikers flinched. Even the leader, despite everything, felt his own feet tremble. The traveler looked at them, his gaze steady. "I gave you a chance to walk away." He let the words sink in. Then, his expression hardened. "Now I'm giving you one last chance." The message was clear. Stay, and suffer the consequences. Or leave, and pretend this never happened. The bikers hesitated. But some of them, the smart ones, were already stepping back. They had just looked into the eyes of something they weren't ready to face. And they wanted no part of it. But the leader? His pride still fought to keep him standing. His pride was the only thing left. And that, more than anything else, was about to be his downfall. The leader's breath came out ragged, uneven. His hands were still clenched into fists, but for the first time in his life, he didn't know what to do. He had spent years ruling over these streets, terrorizing anyone who crossed his path. He had never lost before. Until now. The traveler had done something that no one else had ever managed. He had made the leader feel small. Weak. Helpless. And the worst part? He wasn't even trying. A few of the bikers had already started backing away. They weren't going to fight for their leader anymore. They weren't going to risk their own necks for a lost cause. Ricky, the youngest biker, turned toward the others. "Guys, we should go. We messed up. This ain't worth it." The tattooed biker with the shaved head hesitated but then nodded. "Yeah, man. This ain't right." One by one, they stepped back. Until the leader was left standing alone. For the first time, his own gang had abandoned him. He felt his throat tighten. How had this happened? How had everything fallen apart in a matter of minutes? He turned back to the traveler, trying to summon one last bit of defiance. "You think you won?" The traveler simply raised an eyebrow. Then, in that same steady, unnerving voice, he said, "I never needed to." The leader felt his stomach drop. Because he understood what that meant. This was never a competition. The traveler was never trying to prove himself. He wasn't here to fight for dominance. Because he was already on a level they couldn't reach. And now, he had taken everything from the leader without even lifting a finger. His gang. His power. His control. All gone. The traveler took one final step toward him, and the leader flinched. For the first time in his life, he was afraid. But the traveler didn't raise a hand. Didn't make a move to hurt him. Instead, he simply said, "Walk away." The leader clenched his jaw, his pride fighting back one last time. But deep down, he knew. This was over. He swallowed the lump in his throat, his hands slowly unclenching. Without another word, he turned away. And with heavy, shame-filled steps, he walked past his own men, who wouldn't even look him in the eyes anymore. One by one, the bikers followed him. They had come into this alley thinking they were invincible. Thinking they ruled these streets. But now, they were just ghosts of what they once were. And as they disappeared into the night, the traveler stood alone once again. Unshaken. Unbothered. Because he had always known how this would end. It was never a fight. Just a lesson. And the bikers had learned it the hard way. The leader's boots scraped against the pavement as he walked away, his shoulders hunched, his pride shattered. His gang, once loyal, once laughing alongside him, now walked in silence. No one spoke. No one dared to. Because the moment they had turned their backs, they knew. They weren't a gang anymore. They were nothing. The traveler stood there, watching them leave, his expression unreadable. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply let them go. But he knew the truth. This night would haunt them. They had built their world on fear, intimidation, and dominance. And in just a few minutes, it had all crumbled. The leader could feel it, the weight of his own defeat. He could feel the way his men no longer looked at him the same. They weren't following him anymore. They were just walking beside him, waiting for the right moment to disappear. And he knew, deep down, most of them would be gone by morning. Because what was a gang, when their leader had been humiliated? What was power, when it could be taken away so easily? The traveler turned away, finally breaking his gaze from them. It was over. But then, the leader stopped. He stood frozen in place, his hands clenching at his sides. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath quickening. Because suddenly, he realized something. Something worse than his gang abandoning him. Worse than the fear clawing at his throat. Worse than the humiliation. It was what the traveler had never done. He had never hit them. Never fought back. Never even raised his voice. He had destroyed them without lifting a single hand. The leader's fingers tightened into fists. That was what made this worse than anything else. Because it meant, this man was holding back. He had let them go. And that meant only one thing. He had never seen them as a real threat. The leader's breath caught in his throat. The gang noticed he had stopped walking and turned back to look at him. But he couldn't move. The realization sat like a weight on his chest. If the traveler had truly wanted to, he could have ended them all. That thought sent a cold chill down his spine. His pride had been fighting against the truth all night. But now, it was undeniable. He wasn't just walking away because he lost. He was walking away because he had been allowed to. And for the first time in his life, he felt what true power really was. It wasn't about being feared. It wasn't about control. It wasn't about how many people followed you. It was about being the kind of man that didn't need to fight at all. And he had never been that man. His legs felt weak. His vision blurred. Because he understood now. He had spent his whole life trying to prove himself. Trying to be the strongest. The most respected. But tonight, he had stood in front of a man who didn't need to prove anything. Because that man had already seen things far worse than them. And when someone like that looks at you like you're nothing, it's because you are. The leader slowly turned back to his gang. And for the first time ever, they weren't looking at him for direction. They were looking at him like a man who had already lost. One by one, they walked past him. Not waiting for orders. Not looking back. Not even acknowledging him. And in that moment, he knew it was over. The gang was gone. The name he had built for himself, wiped away. And all because of one man. One man who never even had to fight. The leader took a shaky breath. Then, without another word, he disappeared into the darkness. And the traveler? He had already moved on. Because to him, this had never been a fight. It was just another night. And in his world, it was nothing special. Just another lesson learned the hard way.